Hello, I'm Maxine Harley. Do you believe that every child deserves to have a happy childhood? And is that something you want for your child? Yes? Great. Well, in that case, I'm in the right place and so are you. Let's have a think about what gets in the way of a child having a happy childhood. Clearly, there are the obvious things like abuse and neglect, and serious accidents and trauma, illnesses and hospitalisations, and the death of parents. But there's also a significant aspect that we often overlook, and that's the emotional state of the parents and the emotional atmosphere in the home. Now, I'm sure you can imagine if parents have got their own difficulties with certain things, then these are going to get passed on to their children. So, for instance, if a parent is struggling with their own low self-esteem, their own low body image, or bad relationship, unhealthy relationship with food or drink, maybe they're anxious and tend to be, hypervigilant and worrier and nervous and overly cautious and overprotective. Or maybe they're depressed and they're just not emotionally available for the child. Perhaps the parent is suffering from their own traumas that are still unresolved from their own childhood. Or maybe they've got grief issues from the loss of a baby, maybe stillborn or miscarriage, or loss of a family member. All sorts of things can come into play and affect the way that a parent can relate to their child. As well as that, there's a category of people who say, well, they did have a happy childhood and yet they didn't feel loved. So what that means is really that their parents may have provided them with lots of nice clothes and toys and a good school and good holidays, but they didn't give them the time and the attention that the child needed to feel loved, to feel special, to have some structure in their lives. And if that was lacking, then although in their heads they say, well, yes, I had a happy childhood, let me dig a little bit deeper. There isn't that level of happiness that really could have done with. Okay, so let's contrast that with a situation where none of that stuff's going on. Okay, what's the difference? Well, we know that the child's brain develops differently. A child has more secure emotional attachments to people. They have better emotional intelligence, so they can understand and regulate their own emotions and understand emotions of other people and communicate better. They have more healthy and robust self-esteem. They do better at school. They have better relationships with their peers. They go on to have better relationships in adulthood and to do better at work, be more successful in their work and career, and to go on to become better parents themselves. So a huge benefit to getting it right in the early days for our children. So clearly there's a gap between these two places that needs to be filled. Okay? And that's what I'm really interested in, particularly helping people as soon as possible. I mean, ideally, before we even have a child, when we're expecting a child, or if not, then in the first 2 years of life is really crucial. It's never too late to make a difference and to help your child, but it's best to get in as early as you possibly can. Okay, so who am I to talk to you about this? Well, I'll share a little bit about myself now. Have you ever done anything that you felt ashamed about? Yeah, perhaps really shocked that you behaved like that. Well, I did quite a few years ago now, and it's actually brought me to where I am now, standing here doing this video. If you'd have been there with me all those years ago when my own daughter was a baby, well, she was a toddler, she just started to walk. And I was in the kitchen of my home. It was a terrace townhouse, so a long, narrow kitchen. And she was just playing with some toys behind me. So there I am at the sink, and I can remember there being a pile of fresh laundry there, and a lovely smell of fresh laundry in the room, and everything was tidy and in its place. In fact, everything was tidy and in its place in the whole house. I was quite proud of the fact that a couple of friends called me Wonder Woman and Superwoman, because I was always well dressed with my makeup on. You know, the mask was there, I'm fine and everything's fine, but actually the mask was slipping and I was really, really struggling to cope. I couldn't remember the last time I'd had a decent night's sleep. I was really struggling to cope by myself as a single parent without any help from anyone. And I was also struggling financially. After having been in full-time work, I was now on benefits and really struggling to make ends meet. This wasn't a planned pregnancy. So here I am, I'm washing the dishes at the sink, feeling pretty overwhelmed and tired, and in my own little space. All of a sudden, I hear a clatter of crockery behind me. She's in the kitchen cupboard. In a split second, before I could think about it, I'd lunged across that kitchen floor. Get out of there! Oh, what have I done? I've turned into my own mother. First things first, I now recall it, repair the tear. I tended to my daughter. I soothed her, I comforted her, get things back on an even keel, make things right again. But what I did really shocked me. And what shocked me most was the look on her face, that look of fear and a pleading of, please don't hurt me. because I knew that feeling myself many times in childhood, and I'd always wanted to make sure that I didn't repeat history, and I did. And in that moment I'm thinking about my own mother, and I refused to be like you and to treat her like you treated me. So I made a little promise to my daughter, a silent promise, that I would sort myself out, whatever that took, so that I didn't let history repeat itself again. Now, in that scenario, I committed all three of the mistakes that I want to tell you about in a moment. And I didn't do it on purpose, I did it because I didn't know any different. So I want to make it absolutely clear, I'm not suggesting for one moment that you would ever lash out at your child in the way that I did. But the point I'm making is, when we have emotional wounds, then they bleed a little in our everyday interactions with people. But when we're particularly overwhelmed and stressed and tired, then things can burst out and have really bad consequences, as they did in my case. So from that situation, that led me on to needing to learn some things to find out, who was I and why did I behave like that? And I attended some classes on psychology, child development, personality formation, human relationships, genetics, just about anything I could get my hands on, really. It did help that there was a creche there for 4 mornings a week, which saved my sanity too. So from there I then trained in counselling, which was like a completely different language to me at the time, and I started to see some clients. Beyond that, I then went on to train to be a psychotherapist, and in that time I became quite a therapy junkie. I devoured at least 400 or 500 books, most of which I've still got. I attended every workshop, conference, seminar that I could get my hands on. And I also had 4 years of my own personal therapy, which, to be honest, didn't do a great deal for me, other than point out that I was competitive, I compared myself to other people, and I didn't show my emotions very much, which I kind of knew anyway. But interestingly, the most profound thing for me, the most profound experience, was a weekend residential workshop I did, and that's about healing the inner child. Now, I knew about it in theory, but to actually experience it made a huge difference to my life, because the little child that we once were still lives inside us, and that's the place where the wounds occur, and that's the place of greatest healing. So over the years I've now become a highly skilled practitioner, apparently, and I've supervised the work of other therapists, and I was even asked to speak at an international conference in Rome, but I declined because I was too frightened to speak in public, and that's after 4 years of therapy. So in the last 20 years as a therapist, I've identified the gaps that exist in what counselling, therapy and coaching have to offer. And I've created my own, what I call whole brain and holistic approaches to fill those gaps. And with your permission, I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a moment. I wanted to demystify therapy and to make knowledge and skills available to people for them to be able to help themselves. I also wanted to create something that I could have done with myself years ago, and something that I could have afforded. Okay, so let's talk now about these 3 big mistakes that mums and dads make that really impact their children. So first things first, it's really important to remind ourselves that we've all got stuff, more of it or less of it, and we deal with it in different ways. So this is not sort of blaming or shaming anybody. We've all got something that we could do with improving and getting our heads around and sorting out, so that we're better able to parent our children. So the 3 big mistakes are: first one, not healing our own emotional wounds. Okay, so what do we mean by emotional wounds? These are the traumas that we've experienced ourselves in childhood, the emotional as well as the physical traumas. That may also have come from having harsh, cold parents who smacked or shouted at us, or even intrusive, smothering parents that never give a child any headspace or any room to use their own imagination or create their own identity. And also, as we mentioned a little bit earlier, emotionally unavailable parents. And again, this might be that they're well-intentioned and well-meaning, but they're preoccupied with work or caring for other relatives, or maybe a child with special needs. There's all sorts of reasons whereby they're just not emotionally available for the child, and the child isn't able to absorb that and make good use of it. There may also have been, as we also mentioned a moment ago, family abuse, neglect and addictions. And this all affects how we then relate to other people, because we are emotionally reactive rather than calmly responding to situations. And the second big mistake is not taking care of our own needs. And I don't mean our grooming needs, because when we're a mum that can kind of goes by the by a little bit, doesn't it? So what I mean by that is wanting or expecting other people to take care of our needs for us, and probably resenting that other people have needs too. Maybe manipulating people to try and get our needs met by being victim or needy or attention seeking, and then feeling ashamed and inadequate and just not able to cope. Perhaps because we've got a short fuse, or we've got some angry resentment that other people come first, particularly a child who should always come first. And there's that sense of, yes, but what about me? And the third mistake is we don't control ourselves. We don't control our thoughts, our feelings, our behaviour and our language. And as you can see from the scenario I shared with you a moment ago with my daughter, that I was out of control. And that lack of control results in unpredictable, erratic parenting, so the child just doesn't know where they stand. The parent may be comfort eating or drinking to try and anaesthetise themselves and to kind of take their mind off their problems. There's perhaps negativity and pessimism around, and there's most likely relationship problems and distress around too. The child is scared, they're confused, they find it really hard to trust or to feel safe. And the child watches and copies the parent's behaviour. So it's important to remember, these things aren't intentional. We don't go out there intending to make these three mistakes. We make them because we're unaware of what's going on for ourselves and we don't know how to avoid making them. So there's no blaming, no shaming, no guilt tripping going on. It's not your fault that you're in a position whereby you're making those mistakes, but it is your responsibility to now become aware of it and to sort it and fix it to give your child a happier childhood. Which begs the big question, how? How do we avoid making those three big mistakes? What do we need to have in place to make sure that we're not doing these things? I'll tell you that now. You can select your life. Okay, this is a format and a structure that I've created, as well as the name of a company. And as you can probably tell, if you can see clearly enough, the select is an acronym. And select also meaning choosing from a range of options. Okay? Not just having the life that someone's passed down to you, but actually consciously choosing the sort of life you want for yourself and for your children. So let's have a look at this acronym, select. The first letter S is for self-awareness. Because without self-awareness, we don't know who we are, and we don't know what we like, and we don't realise how we're behaving and the impact that has on other people. So let's contrast that with a situation where we do have some awareness and we kind of get it. We understand what it is that we're doing, and we understand how we are communicating with other people and how and why they're responding to us in the way that they are, particularly when we're talking about our family and our children. So again, there's a gap between these two places that needs to be filled with self-awareness. I want to share a couple of analogies with you, which I hope will help. Quite a few weeks ago now, I was on a train, a crowded train. It was from Birmingham New Street down to London Euston. Now, the previous train had been cancelled at the very last minute, so the platform's packed, and we were all herded across to another platform to get onto another train, which was already busy. So I had to fight my way through, and I managed to get myself a seat. And on that journey, a guy across from me just sneezed twice. Didn't cover his nose up or anything, just sneezed out twice. Have you ever had that? It's horrible, isn't it? You try not to breathe, looking away, but I've seen the documentary. Those germs are flying down that carriage about 100 miles an hour. You can't help but breathe them in. And it got me thinking, in a way, it's similar to emotional germs that we pick up in childhood. They're sneezed onto us, we become infected by them. And over the years, we perhaps build up some resilience and resistance and become a carrier of them. And maybe sneeze them out over other people later on. Maybe those people, maybe young people and children, don't have the same resilience to those germs that we've built up, and they become more greatly affected by them. So my question to you would be, do you want to be passing your emotional germs onto your children? No. Another analogy, I want to ask you, have you ever carried a heavy bag or backpack, rucksack on your shoulders? Yeah? I did at school. I had a satchel. in those days, a leather one. I used to scratch it up to make it look cool and trendy. I don't know whether it really worked, but anyway, that's what we did. And I used to have to walk to school and back every day, which now when I look back was quite a long way. And my satchel was always heavy with books. I didn't realise, but over the years it caused my shoulder to droop down, to become lower, which wasn't a particular problem for me until about 10 years ago when I was painting some ceilings and had a real problem with my shoulder. And it took me a great deal of pain and a lot of time and a lot of money to get it put right, particularly the physiotherapist to put right what the chiropractor had done. And you can probably see some analogies there with therapy, that it takes a long time and lots of money. Now the point I'm making is when we're carrying a heavy weight, it can build up over time and we don't notice that it's kind of bending us out of shape and it's changing our posture. And we're not as free and mobile as we used to be. So if you think in terms of that backpack or rucksack, carrying emotional weight that people have put in over the years without you realising it, and it's been building up and getting heavier. And my question to you would be, do you want to be passing that weight onto your children for them to carry too? No, of course not. So it's important that we realise that the backpack is there, open it up and take that stuff out to lighten the load for you and make sure that you're not passing it on. So the takeaway from this is that self-awareness is the first step towards change. And next comes education. In fact, I'll do the third one at the same time. That's learning of new skills. Because without education and learning of new skills, we can have all the awareness in the world, but it's not doing us any good. In fact, we're feeling worse because we realise what it is we're doing, but we don't know how to stop doing it. So again, we need to contrast that with a situation whereby we get the right sort of education and we're learning the right sort of skills so that we understand why we are the way we are, why we're behaving the way we do, and most importantly, learning the skills that we need to make those changes. And that has a really important knock-on effect, not only to our children, but everybody we relate to. So once again, there's a gap between these two places that needs to be filled with the right education and the right learning. Now, I'm guessing like me, you went to school, yeah? And probably like me, you learned all sorts of stuff that's absolutely no use to you whatsoever. Yeah. For me, it's maths, sines and cosines and trigonometry, I don't even know what that is anymore. Chemistry, Latin, all sorts of things. Now, what I could have done with knowing about was the stuff I had to find out about myself later on. That was the psychology, child development, human relationships, and learning about myself and how to become the best me I could be and to be really empowered. Now, admittedly, kids nowadays probably do get some of that stuff in school, but they didn't in my day, and they probably didn't in your parents' day, so we haven't been able to pass that on to you. Now, to be fair, we now know a lot more than we did even a few years ago, particularly about the brain and neuroscience, which is a real interest and passion of mine. I have to hold my hand up to being a bit of a nerd. Now, for instance, there's something called neurogenesis. Now, neurons are the name for brain cells, as you may already know. And the brain has the ability to create new connections based upon what's required, new experiences that are repeated over time. There's also something called neuroplasticity, which is nothing to do with plastic. It means the brain has the ability to mould and shape itself, again, depending on what's required. So if one part of the brain isn't working as well as it should, another part can come on board and help to compensate. And also, if part of the brain needs to be expanded, for instance, a number one violinist or a concert pianist or a grand chess master or even a taxi driver in London needing to learn the knowledge of all the roads and streets in London, then a part of the brain can actually get bigger to accommodate that need. So we've got neurogenesis and neuroplasticity. There's also something called mirror neurons. Now these are brain cells that are activated when we see an action going on out there that has an emotional component to it, and we are affected almost as if that's happening to us. So for instance, if we see somebody stubbing their toe or biting their tongue or walking into a lamppost, then we have a certain ouch feeling as well, particularly if it has happened to us. And one step further from that is something called emotional contagion, whereby we are really impacted and affected by the emotional mood around us. So you can imagine the jubilation of the football crowd or national mourning when Princess Diana died. And also if you're working, then the atmosphere of a boss, how the atmosphere that a boss can create in the workplace. So think now in terms of your own home and the atmosphere, the emotional atmosphere in your home that your child is absorbing. Now, it's all very well saying, oh, we don't argue in front of the children. Well, you do, because even if they're not present, there's an atmosphere, an emotional mood that they are able to pick up, that emotional contagion. Something else we now know about more recently is called automaticity, which I think is a lovely word. And what this is about is learning a new behaviour, because on average it takes 66 days for you to learn a new behaviour, and for that new behaviour to become easier to do than the old one, for it to become more automatic. Now, it is an average figure. It can be anything from 18 days to much more than 66 days, but on average it's 66 days. So don't go giving yourself a hard time if things don't change straight away. You really need to keep at it. Now, we also know it takes about 21 days to change the way you see yourself, your own self-concept, and that also can take a little bit longer. But changing behaviour, you really need to stick at it. Another thing we know more about nowadays is brain development. Now, that includes that from the time the child is in the womb and the birth experience, particularly if it's traumatic, and those early days and weeks and months of life, particularly up to the first 2 and 3 years, when the brain is developing at a phenomenal rate. And your child doesn't have any verbal memory of that time. Everything that's happening is stored in their body as a sort of memory in their body, but they're not able to later on tell you about what happened, because that part of the brain isn't developed enough for them to have a verbal story about what happened to them, but everything is being remembered. Okay. And by the time the child is aged about 6, we have in place, all of us, you, me, everyone, our own subconscious belief system. This is our template for life. This says, who am I? You know, what do I deserve? What can I expect? What's my life going to be like? And we create a filter that only allows in what fits that belief system, and everything else is discarded. So in that way, we create out there, you know, a reflection of what's going on in here. And our subconscious belief system is also running a lot of our bodily systems out of our awareness. It has a huge impact upon us. And it's a million times more powerful, more processing power than the conscious mind, and it's really resistant to change. So it's really, really important that we get these things right for our children as early as we possibly can. Now, I mentioned a moment ago that self-awareness is the first step towards change, but with education and learning the right skills, you can change anything you want to change. It's really important that you remember that. And then we have the E for emotional balance and intelligence. I mentioned emotional intelligence earlier. It's about understanding and regulating our own emotions and understanding other people's emotions and being able to communicate with them. And in fact, that's a greater indicator of success in life than IQ and simple intelligence is. In emotional balance, and this is about being able to control our emotions and keep them within a certain bandwidth. So we're not going all up here and hyper and worry and panicky, and if so, we know how to calm ourselves down, and we're not down here in the depths, and if we are, we know how to bring ourselves up so that we stay within that healthy bandwidth. And we're modelling that for our children as well, which is really important. Then we have the C of control, controlling our thoughts and the way we respond emotionally rather than just reacting without thinking, and the way we communicate and the way we behave. And with that comes clarity as well as choice. And then we have the T for transformation, which is what it's all about. Changing, making a difference, going through a process, sticking with it, repeating it, so that you have the benefits of the transformation at the end of it. So to recap, we've got self-awareness, education, learning new skills, emotional balance, control, choice and clarity, transformation. So a little bit of maths that wasn't wasted on me completely is S for self-awareness plus E, education, plus L, learning new skills, equals E, emotional balance, C, that control, which leads on to T for transformation. So quick recap, the 3 big mistakes that parents make: not healing their own emotional wounds, not taking care of their own needs, and not controlling themselves. So what do we need to help us to avoid making those mistakes? We need a process, we need a structure. This is why I created Select Your Life, so that gives you that structure. You go through that process, have that transformation, have the change, and not be making those mistakes. And all of the things that I've created, like I say, they're whole brain and holistic. They work with the whole person, not just one aspect of the person or one or two like other therapies do. And they all offer this select process is self-awareness, education, learning new skills, emotional balance, control and transformation, but just in different formats. And they all help us to prevent making those 3 big mistakes so that we can become a better parent, a better partner and a better person. So thank you very much for sticking with me and watching this video. I hope you found it useful. If you would like to get some more information, then please go to my website www.maxineharley.com, and as I say, you can find on there the free questionnaire, the free e-booklet, the 7 keys booklet, which you can get for free by putting in free 7 keys in capitals in the checkout. Also look at the blogs, and I hope that I can be of service to you. And if there's anything that you want to know or to ask me, then please email me, maxine@maxineharley.com, and I hope to hear from you soon. Thank you and goodbye.